Americans like to think that these were rugged individualists who conquered the West on their own, but that's not the case at all. There was a lot of deception involved. They did it with the assistance of the federal government. So this myth of the rugged individual is just that, it's a myth.
Outside Kentucky and Ohio, Simon Kenton isn't well known, not like his friend and fellow frontiersman Daniel Boone. Kenton's larger-than-life adventures are also the stuff of legend. But Boone had better publicity. Edna Kenton described her ancestor as a free agent, a man of his own, with the ability to adapt himself on the instant to whatever was, and with the will to act by the golden rule. Simon Kenton was a frontiersman and soldier in West Virginia, Kentucky, and Ohio. Kenton was born on April 3, 1755, in Virginia, to Mark Kenton Sr., an immigrant from Ireland, and Mary Miller Kenton, a Scots-Welsh descendant. As a youth, he had no formal education. The boy worked the family tobacco farm only sporadically, preferring to spend most of his time roaming the surrounding woods. By the time he reached his teenage years, he was, according to biographer and descendant Edna Kenton, a tall, lithe, straight, auburn-haired, blue-eyed idler. The transition from aimless youth to noted frontiersman, soldier, scout, Indian fighter, explorer, and adopted Shawnee Brave began when Kenton was nearly 16, as a result of a mistake. Apparently, he had become smitten with a local belle, and when she had become engaged to another, the jilted teen challenged his successful rival to a fight, which the headstrong Kenton lost. Several months later, he braced his foe for a second time. During this contest, Kenton, who had developed into a well-muscled 6-footer, an 1830 document describes him as a giant of a man at the time when the average height for men was 5 foot 8 inches, delivered a blow that left his opponent stretched unmoving on the ground. Believing he had killed his adversary and fearing the gallows, Kenton immediately fled Virginia for the frontier west, taking nothing with him but the blood-stained clothes he wore. Haste was essential. Although the country itself was vast, the population was relatively small, and people generally knew or knew of one another. Kenton was keenly aware of the need to outrun the news of what he had believed was a hanging offense. Now on his own, and on the run, the teenager lacked both a rifle and the wherewithal to purchase or trade for one. In exchange for food and lodging, he performed brief odd jobs for settlers whose homesteads he encountered on his flight. He'd adopt the family name to each one of the various settlers whom he had visited, claiming a distant kinship in order to endear himself. After journeying some 100 miles on foot, Kenton arrived in the settlement of Warm Springs. There, he introduced himself as Simon Butler at the home of widower and affluent miller, Jacob Butler. The youth eventually arrived at a settlement near the recently built Fort Pitt at the source of the Ohio River. There he fell in with 2 hunters who were planning to follow the Ohio in the wilderness variously known as Kentucky, Kentucky, and Kentucky. It also was referred to as Middle Ground, and more ominously, the Dark and Bloody Ground. Kentucky was a breeding spot for legend and myth, and legends flourished about the region's so-called cane lands. These cane lands reputably stretched for untold miles and contained seamlessly endless tracts of fertile land rich with game. As it turned out, fields of river cane, a species of bamboo, were in fact common in Kentucky. The older of Kenton's 2 companions, Jacob Yeager, had been a captive of the Indians for years as a child, spoke several native languages, and had traveled with his captors into Kentucky. Yeager, who went by the sobriquet the Long Dutchman, described the numberless herds of buffalo, elk, and deer of the region. It was an avid teemed with game and rich and arable land for those who were bold enough to claim it. In company with 2 hunters, with rifles and traps in hand, and newly fashioned canoe packed with winter provisions, 16-year-old Simon Butler set off down the Ohio River. resolved to start life afresh in this wilderness Eden. The new land, however, was not without its perils. In addition to its natural bounties, this wild country was home to the powerful Shawnee tribe, which was violently opposed to the Anglo intrusion. For decades since the late 1600s, western settlers had driven this tribe of the Algonquin Nation from place to place, from their homeland in the southern Great Lakes region into Pennsylvania, and finally into Kentucky and Ohio. Here, along with the other tribes, they dug in, resolved not to be moved again. A big man in stature and strength, his stamina was often tested as he endured the worst that was known on the frontier. During the late winter of 1773, Simon and the two companions were attacked around the campfire as they were drying their wet clothes near present-day Charleston, West Virginia. One companion was killed while Simon and the other man barely escaped without food, clothing, or rifles. After a week of wandering down the Great Kawana River, suffering from hunger and exposure, they finally reached the Ohio River, where they met some mountain men. After recovering, Kenton then spent time hunting along the Ohio River and searching for legendary cane lands along the Ohio that he heard so much about. In 1774, he served as a scout for the European settlers against the Shawnee Indians during Lord Dunmore's War in what is now West Virginia and Kentucky. By 1775, Kenton had moved to Boonesboro, Kentucky. For the next few years, he worked as a scout for the settlement, often coming in contact with local American Indians. In April 1777, during an Indian attack on Fort Boonesboro in Kentucky, a bullet struck Daniel Boone's leg, and he found himself staring up at a Shawnee tomahawk. Kenton charged, shot the scalper, and clubbed another attacker, then lifted Boone up by his arms and carried him, dodging and darting, to safety. When he got back to camp, Boone said to him, "Well, Simon, you have behaved like a man today. Indeed, you are a fine fellow." During the American Revolution, Kenton participated in a number of military engagements against the British and their American Indian allies. In 1778, he joined George Rogers Clark on a difficult but successful expedition into Illinois country to attack British outposts as well as Indian settlements. Returning home, he accompanied Daniel Boone in an attack on the Shawnee settlement of Chillicothe near what is now Old Town, Ohio. In September 1778, while on a spying mission in Chillicothe near Xena, Ohio, Kenton was captured by Shawnee Indians. He was forced to run the infamous quarter-mile gauntlet, while being beaten with sticks and 2 lines of Indians. This ritual often killed many prisoners, but Kenton survived 9 times. Severely wounded after this and other ritual tortures, he was saved by longtime friend Simon Gertie, who convinced the Shawnee to adopt Kenton as one of their own. The Shawnee respected Kenton for his endurance, and they named him Katahotha, the condemned man to hang. Finally, in June 1779, Simon was sent to Fort Detroit as part of a prisoner trade with the British. He was soon freed and returned to service under George Rogers Clark. In 1782, he discovered that the man he thought he killed in Virginia had actually lived, and he took back his original surname. Kenton started exploring the area of the Mad River Valley of Ohio and making claims as early as 1788. Kenton first saw the area a decade before as he was held as prisoner with the Shawnee, and he vowed that if he survived, he would return. During the next several years, Kenton lived a relatively quiet life. He settled near Maysville, Kentucky, where he married Martha Dowden and purchased some large tracts of land. The couple would have 4 children together. In 1793 and 94, Kenton fought in the Northwest Indian War with Mad Anthony Wayne and fought at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. After Kenton's wife died in a house fire, the widower married Elizabeth Jarboe in 1798 and moved to Ohio. He had 6 children with her. They lived near present-day Springfield. In April 1799, Kenton and his associate, Colonel William Ward, led a group of families from Mason County, Kentucky, to an area between present-day Springfield and Urbana, Ohio. In 1810, Kenton moved up to Urbana, Ohio, where he achieved the rank of Brigadier General of the state militia. He served in the War of 1812 as both a scout and leader of a militia group in the Battle of Thames in 1813. This was the battle in which the famous Indian chief Tecumseh was killed. Kenton was chosen to identify Tecumseh's body, but recognizing both Tecumseh and another fallen warrior named Roundhead, and seeing soldiers gleefully eagering to carve up Tecumseh's body into souvenirs, he identified Roundhead as the chief. Kenton moved to the Zanesville, Ohio area in 1820. During the last 20 years of his life, Kenton lived in poverty because of land ownership disputes and mismanagement of his money. He survived on a government pension of $20 a month. In 1836, Kenton died in Logan County and was initially buried in New Jerusalem. In 1865, his remains were moved to Urbana. The state of Ohio constructed a monument to mark his grave.
Outside of Kentucky and Ohio, not much is known about Simon Kenton, one of the greatest frontiersmen of all time.